See, I was right all along. Yeah, but knock on wood, I seem to be doing pretty well.
Good. So once again, call the meeting to order. It's 7:05. My name is Wayne Benjamin, and I chair the Land Use Committee for Manhattan Community Board 12. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our June 7th meeting, and it will be our last meeting before the board goes to summer hiatus. So we do not meet in July and August. There is a committee of the whole meeting in July, but there will be no official committee meetings in July or August. So we reconvene in September as if we were going back to school. Before we begin, I'd like to have my committee members introduce themselves. So I will call you as I see you on my screen, beginning with Anthony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Viola. I am a member of Land Use as well as the Licensing Committee and the Bylaws Task Force. I joined very recently back in January, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Anthony. Vivian.
Hi, my name is Vivian Ducat. I'm a public member, but I was for 3 years on the full committee. I've been on this committee for probably 15 years. And I live both across the street in one direction from Anthony and the other from Wayne. I live in Lower Washington Heights. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel Bonilla. I am an artist in the Inward Washington Heights area, and I also sit on the Parks and Cultural Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Daniel. Osi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Osi. I am a member of the Land Use Committee on and off for the last 8 years. And I'm also a member of the Health and Environment Committee. Thank you,
Osi. James.
Me?
We.
I'm Jim Berlin. I've been on this community board 42 years now. It's amazing. And way back when I was actually the chair, and I was the chair of the land use, I've been very busy on the community board. Currently I'm the parliamentarian, as many of you know, and I'm very honored because that's an appointed position. And I'm on two committees that I think both have truly excellent chairs, this one and the Traffic and Transportation Committee. So, and I think, you know, the concept of, I get to talk because I'm old. The concept of community boards and community government is, I think, extremely important. And it's even more important that we as a community board, which interfaces with the community, be exemplars of how to run meetings properly and stuff like that. So there we go. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim. And in addition to the board members who are on the committee, I see two other board members who may or may not very soon be committee members. So Hector.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hector Bonilla. I joined the community board back in September, appointed by Mark Levine. I'm currently on the business development committee, and I said with parentheses on the land use committee, sensitive to Wayne's opinion and decision. And,
well, actually, I'm happy to have you. I'm just waiting for Catherine to confirm.
Sounds great. Contention on Catherine's confirmation on that. Born and raised in Washington Heights, and I also work in finance, and I figure joining the community board will be the excellent way to be part of the grassroots of our political system. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. And I also see who I think is a new board member, Heidi Guzman.
Hi, everyone. I just was appointed last month to the community board, so I'm just sort of sitting in on as many committees as I can. I lived in the Heights since October 2019, and I work at the Civilian Complaint Review Board as an investigating attorney, investigating racial profiling and other forms of biased policing. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what you guys do today.
So thanks for visiting and welcome to Community Board 12. So a couple updates before we get into the two agenda items. The first item on the agenda was an update on the Cummings Street Board of Standards and Appeals application. And the committee members will remember that we last year, if I'm not mistaken, reviewed a Board of Standards and Appeal application for this proposed development, and it's gone through a couple of iterations. The board was supposed to make its final decision on Monday, June 5th. However, that vote was rescheduled because the environmental review is not yet complete. So there is no update on that application other than, it's still open. BSA is no longer taking comments or testimony on that. So that part of the process is in fact over, but the decision of the board, whether they are going to approve it or not, has not been made, and it's on hold pending the completion of the environmental review. Two additional updates. The committee and the board passed a resolution a couple months ago supporting a request for evaluation that was submitted by a resident of Inwood for the Landmarks Preservation Commission to consider 101 Cooper Street for landmark designation. The LPC very quickly responded and basically declined to do so. I circulated the letter that was sent to the Inwood resident to the committee, but basically, they're indicating that although the architectural firm who designed it, in fact have designed other, Art Deco buildings that are landmark, those buildings, are, I guess, much better examples of, the sort of an innovative use of Art Deco on residential buildings that heretofore was a style used for commercial and That being the case, one of the things I pointed out was, and this is what we discussed at the time of the meeting, is there have been discussions for the last decade or more of having an Inwood apartment house district. And although an individual building may not be, an superb example of, the, particular style, or there may not be, a famous person or people who are associated with it. When you look at a district, the district may be the thing that is telling the story. The district may be the thing that merits consideration and designation. So I encourage, Lisa, who I believe is also attending this meeting, to, pursue with other stakeholders, and I'm sure the community board would be interested because we've discussed this in the past, to pursue, apartment house district. And so this is something we can get back to. Speaking of landmarks, in May, this committee considered and passed a resolution supporting LPC's proposed designation of 935 St. Nicholas Avenue. That building was deemed to be significant by LPC for two reasons. Architecturally, it's a great example of, Gothic revival architecture applied to early 20th century apartment buildings, and the firm that designed it was in fact very prolific during the first part of the 20th century, and many of their other apartment buildings can be found in other, historic districts. But more importantly, 935 was home to Duke Ellington for about 21 years, and was home to Noble Sissel for 20 to 22 years. We passed that resolution at the full board. I signed up to give testimony at yesterday's LPC hearing because it wasn't clear to me if the resolution that we passed, had been submitted. It actually was submitted somewhat at the last minute. But I shared with the commissioners that CB12 passed a resolution. The Historic Districts Council representative, whom is here tonight and we'll discuss, also supported, that designation, which sort of brings us to the second item on the agenda, which is in fact a conversation with Frampton Tolbert from the Historic Districts Council to, talk about advancing historic preservation efforts in Washington Heights, and which is something that both this committee and the board has been interested in, for I I think for the entire period of time that I've been on the board, which is like pushing 20 years. What is interesting is in addition to the consideration of 935 St. Nicholas, which is associated with Duke Ellington, LPC also considered Dizzy Gillespie's house and the Cecil Hotel, which is, as we all know, the home of, Biba. And in the discussion of Dizzy Gillespie's house, that's something that I think will be of interest to the board and to others in attendance, because the building is a modest, 3-story, brick building, but its cultural significance, I think LPC has finally gotten to the point where, they can consider, something for landmark designation, even if it's not, architecturally marvelous. There were 2 people who testified that do not support designation, and those people are relatives of the owner. And what is interesting is another person who spoke said something that kind of resonated, with me. She grew up in the area and, pointed out that as the neighborhood changed, there were a lot of people who, did not experience firsthand, the sort of the culture, the legacy of, Dizzy Gillespie and so many other jazz pioneers. And that is one important reason why designation is important, whether or not the building is architecturally magnificent. And we have in Washington Heights and Inwood, discussed a couple of, designations where it's not the architecture that we thought was important, but rather who or what the building was associated with. So, I mean, I just found that interesting. One of the things that came out of that meeting as well was, LPC perhaps needs to do a better job of articulating what they look at and how they look at designations when it's of a cultural or historic nature being the more critical thing as opposed to primarily the architectural. But with that, please allow me to introduce to everyone Frampton Tolbert. And Frampton, you are the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council?
That's correct.
And we've actually in the past had other conversations with HEC, so really happy to reconnect and to have the opportunity to speak with you about how the Land Use Committee and Community Board 12 and residents of Washington Heights and Inwood might go about advancing our interest in preservation in our community district.
Sure. So I can start, but really I'd love to to have this be a discussion and hear from committee members. When I've spoken with Wayne, I've been at Historic Districts Council as the executive director for about a year, and looking at being more proactive in working with our community organizations and our community boards around planning for historic resources. And I think 101 Cooper, as Wayne mentioned, that this was turned down by the LPC recently, and the ownership of the building has said that they're planning on removing the windows, which are a significant feature of that building. So how can we be more proactive in identifying historic resources before they're endangered, like 101 Cooper? Is something that we would love to support the board, this committee on. How do we identify a list of priorities from the board and from community members of both architecturally, historically, and culturally significant sites and districts? I think that's something we would like to work with you on, whether it's a survey or a community meeting, or we do some sort of community plan for outreach and getting those sites identified. As well as I think Wayne knows this, giving the elected officials something to respond to, since they have said that they do support community preservation, but want to know what sites they should be advocating for. And so this would also allow us to get them to advocate on behalf of the community. The last thing I'll say is, at HDC, at Historic Districts Council, we work with over 500 community organizations across the city, and we're looking at other ways to tell the stories of how historic buildings are also helping with our affordable housing crisis. So how we can adaptively reuse historic buildings, and there are many buildings in Manhattan that have been converted into affordable housing, and we've been recently doing some programming around that, as well as sustainability that by retrofitting a lot of these buildings, adding solar panels, doing a lot of retrofitting, we can keep these buildings, in use for another 50, 100 years rather than demolishing them and sending all of that to the landfill, which is really, we're losing a lot of, materials and embodied carbon by doing that. So with that, I would love to pass it back to Wayne. And I don't know if you want to open it up for discussion or how you would like to frame this, but I'd just love to hear from people on your thoughts.
Well, sure. But actually, before I do that, I mean, you make an excellent point that also came up during yesterday's LPC hearing. And, not every landmark building has to be a museum or, a cultural center or something that's open, to the public as a shrine. And the example given was, the Cecil Hotel with his association of Minton's Playhouse, which has operated as supportive housing for formerly homeless adults for decades. And that was actually raised by someone as, a good example of, you can have historic buildings that are, adaptive reuse, lots of other, it was a hotel to begin with, but it was not, supportive. So, just because a building is landmark doesn't mean somehow it becomes some elite building that is not, put to use for whatever the community needs. I know that, in terms of comments, Vivian, OC, Jim, you've all been part of discussions, where we've looked at, historic designation. Anthony, Daniel, Hector and Wendy, you may also have questions. So, the floor is open. This is something that, we've talked about a while. The one question I would pose to Tolbert, or Frampton rather, to kick it off is, when we were discussing the former colored school number 4 a couple of weeks ago, that one of the things that either you pointed out or Eric pointed out to you is, I think he originally submitted an RFE for that in like 2018 or so. And casually, I guess, bumping into one or more LPC commissioners more recently, they had no idea that RFE existed. And, either the community board has passed resolutions supporting RFEs for particular designations in the area, or we may have done it directly. How do we go about making sure when we do something like that, the commissioners actually know about it? Because if it goes to staff and it kind of dies at the staff level, we have no idea whether there's support for what we're talking about at the commissioner level at all.
Yeah, it's definitely a citywide issue. We know that there was originally a request for evaluation, which is these formal requests for landmark building to landmark sites. There used to be a committee at the Landmarks Commission that had commissioners on it. And that was disbanded, I want to say about 15 years ago. And so now those decisions are made by the chair of the commission, the staff, and the legal counsel of the commission on what the commissioners see and what comes forward to the commission. So it's a citywide issue that we are attempting to address. There's not an easy solution, because I think their concern is by reforming a committee, they are required with sunshine laws to have those be public discussions, which they do not want to do. So they would rather have that be an internal process where they don't have to explain this. I think, again, in the case of 101 Cooper, I think through Lisa's work and through the advocacy of both, the community board and through the advocacy of the elected officials is why a response was given so quickly, even though it was not the response that we wanted. A lot of things like where you're talking about the former color school, where Eric submitted that in 2018 and then heard absolutely nothing. So having that advocacy from people up front gets a response from LPC, because there's no timeline they are required to respond to requests. They can send a letter saying we'll look into it, and they never have to send another letter again.
Yeah, I see Vivian's hand.
Yes. Hi, Frampton. You met me at your garden event last year.
Mhm.
I guess, well, we've been fighting three battles of landmarking in Lower Manhattan. One is the building at
Lower
857
Manhattan or Lower Washington Heights?
Lower Washington Heights. Thank you for the correction. The rest of Manhattan doesn't exist, of course.
Of course.
There was a building 857 Riverside Drive that belonged to somebody who was an abolitionist and had been active, at least on Duane Street, in being part of the Underground Railroad. And he then took the same props, a sugar factory, a wharf, and a pleasure boat, and he moved the whole operation once he was kicked out of Lower Manhattan up here. And having put it through landmarks twice, their whole issue was that he never physically lived there, but he owned it. But that was part of the, perhaps that we got a number of scholars writing, perhaps in fact, the building then faced the river and it was empty for use as also a place to stay for the fugitive slaves. This starting in 2015, I think 2016, we won the Six to Celebrate for our work in trying to preserve the 12 row houses on 158th Street. And we sort of sent almost two takes on it. One was really the fact that, among other things, one of the first members of the New York State what was it called? The Something in Byways, the original preservation organization, Bolton, who was also an archaeologist up here, who was, he actually made rapid skyscrapers that made elevators that made skyscrapers possible. Anyway, he lived on this block, on that particular block. And he was, that's one thing. And it was also, it became in the 60s, sort of middle class, historically Black college and university educated group of people who changed those houses from being multiple, from being basically SROs or some sort of rooming house thing into being single family houses. And the street actually ends with River Terrace, which is one of the River Terrace buildings, which was really, middle-class housing. People who were African-American were kind of thrown there. They went to meetings on 72nd Street and discovered that this is where they were being steered. But nonetheless, there were a lot of very significant people who, from filmmakers to politicians like David Dinkins, to all kinds of other people who lived there. So it's a particularly significant row. And we got nowhere with at least 2 RFEs and lots of support letters. And I don't know the latest status. There's been a 17-story building planned, even though it sits on an underground river or waterway, and would be a major traffic crisis, given that it's where the highway, you go two-way street on and off the Henry Hudson Parkway, plus an important bicycle lane. But this, they said in one of their rejections that they weren't the best examples of the architectural style that they were, that it was across the street from a loading dock. I mean, we got the most, what I would call ridiculous reasons why they weren't interested. And, there's a real frustration, obviously, for us. This third fight that a group of us have been fighting is changes proposed and being measured out. We saw it the other day for the Academy of Arts, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, that they're a landmark entity and so are we. And there's a lot of blocking of air and light that once was available to a whole street of buildings that are part 156th Street west of Broadway that are all part of the Audubon Park Historic District. It actually raised an interesting question about what happens when 2 historic districts are opposite each other, and how do you perhaps limit change in one of them to not sort of take away from our enjoyment of the one that we're in. And I don't know if that's ever happened before, but it's certainly I mean, it's true the committee could ultimately, when it is calendared, reject it, but honestly, I bet you anything they wouldn't. It's actually what the kind of thing that they consider beautiful up here.
Well, I mean, let me just first speak to your first point, because I would like to know a little bit more about those other 2 points and maybe come back to you. But I think with 857, and this might be somewhere where the board could be helpful, is I don't think that the Landmarks Commission, they are not well explaining their criteria on how they measure cultural significance. And part of 857, they're saying, well, it's not well documented. Well, of course it's not well documented. That was the point of it being an abolitionist and Underground Railroad site. That's not necessarily well documented. So they're able to say the significance doesn't exist or it's not definitive. And so I think, when Wayne was talking about 935 St. Nicholas and some of the other sites, we've said, is there a number of years that people should live in these places? Are there other criteria besides someone just living in a building that you're considering? And they're very vague about it. And I don't know that they know themselves what they're looking for and how they're measuring this. And obviously we want other sites, not just places where people live, but when they did the Fifth Avenue, I think it was called the Fifth Avenue Educational Building a few years ago, which I believe was I'll have to look it up, but was the first headquarters of the NAACP and other significant organizations. That was a really good, I think, example of a significant cultural site, because I don't think we just want to do buildings where people lived for just a few years, which I think some of the buildings they've done, people weren't even living in those places for very long. And so it might be good to have this committee think about, is there a letter saying we would like more clarity around what is cultural significance? How are you evaluating these places? Because it's very easy for them to decline them because I don't know that they have any internal guidelines of how they're reviewing them. So maybe we could talk further about how we could work together on something like that, because I think there are a lot of sites, especially in Community District 12, that are going to be both architecturally, historically, and culturally significant.
Yeah, and just to piggyback a bit on what Vivian said concerning 857, LPC said two things. One was, the sort of the lack of documentation on its role, in the Underground Railroad, which, is to be understood, because if it was well documented, then, the people who were trying to capture human beings and send them back into bondage would be there. But the other was the physical changes that were made to the building. Some people refer to that as the Staten Island building, because someone just, refaced it. Although when, we were visiting the building, that facing is peeling away, and you can see it was applied directly to the original facade. So the original, material is still there. And, one could remove, the refacing, and you'd be back to the original, 1800, facade. Of course, there's a side porch that was removed, and I believe there's a cupola that was removed. But, Hamilton Grange also had, side porches, plural, removed. But, we were arguing that we're not looking at 857 because of its architectural merit. But, not only was it, originally built by an abolitionist, but the second owner, who was, I believe, a friend and colleague of the original owner, was also an abolitionist. And I think they were both kicked out of their, church for being too strong advocates for the abolitionist movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think ILPC, and I would love to hear from other people, LPC has definitely become, I would say, a little more orthodox in their review. And, we just saw a building in Greenpoint in Brooklyn that is totally covered in vinyl siding that was designated as part of a block many years ago. I think that district might be from 1980. And someone is redoing that building and putting more appropriate materials on it. Whereas now LPC won't even consider designating those kinds of buildings. Whereas I think back, many years ago, they were willing to include them in, especially in districts where they felt that there would be an opportunity over time to bring those back to a specific sense of place. But now we're seeing them designate half a block because they don't want to go anywhere near buildings that don't really have those features anymore. So they're just being much more conservative in what they're designating. And then there's a question in the comments about why some other well-documented sites in Northern Manhattan have still not been landmarked. I mean, I think that just from our understanding has been, certain neighborhoods that were landmarked very early, and then over time, other neighborhoods that weren't, the process just became much more difficult. So, the fact that so much of Greenwich Village is landmarked, where so little of Harlem is landmarked, it just seems to be that, LPC did not serve a lot of neighborhoods in the city equally for many, 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 many years. And they, have recently said that they have introduced an equity plan, that they are trying to address neighborhoods and boroughs that have been historically underrepresented by them. And right now they're focusing on the Bronx is what they're saying. And they've designated about 4 or 5 buildings in the Bronx in the past 6 months, but really 4 or 5 buildings is not what we are hoping to see in the Bronx, given the long kind of lack of landmark engagement in that borough.
But I think, and I've also heard from others that, the designation process at the end of the day, it's also a political process. And if you look at, for example, the Upper West Side Historic District and Greenwich Village, which I think are 2 of the largest, there was a lot of community organizing and political pressure, brought to bear to raise the visibility of, those designations. And I recall some discussion of the Upper West Side District, which was deemed to be, too big. It was going to take too much time to document. But, interested party stakeholders, rolled up their sleeves, hit the ground and took pictures and worked on that documentation. And that's one of the things, that we need to stress about, the interest in designation in like Washington Heights and Inwood. And if we're talking about an apartment house district or wherever, it can't just be a discussion, at a committee meeting or at some other community meeting. Folks have to go out there and, do the work that's needed to, help present something, knowing you're working with, maybe an LPC that may not be, that responsive. It's hard to turn something quite quickly if you're given sort of a treasure trove of information, whereas if you ask them to do it, it's not going to happen.
Right. And I would say, that's where we would like to help find, there are opportunities to find grants to do survey work, to do photography, to do documentation. But I think the place that obviously HDC needs your support is then when LPC says, this is a great survey of this apartment district, are the apartment building residents in support? And we say, well, we don't know, or, we would rely on the board and others to do the outreach to get the to get the support and engage with those people, whether we're happy to speak at community meetings and provide materials, but we can't do that outreach directly ourselves because we're not of the community.
Absolutely. Other questions, comments from committee members, board members? OC.
Yeah, thank you. I have 2 questions. One is in regards to solar power on the roof. I mean, if a building was already designated at some point, and now with the local law 97, if they want to install solar panels on the roof, could they still do it if the panels cannot be seen from the street level? What's the that's one part, and the other part, again, related to local law 97, do you feel that some buildings are trying to get designation if they can get exemption from some of local law 97, for example, like heat pumps on the windows and so forth? So I'm just curious about that.
We haven't heard about the second part. Definitely the first part. I mean, LPC, right now, all solar panels come to public hearings of the commission. and they routinely approve them, and we've been very supportive of them. The LPC is actually currently changing their rules, their internal rules, so that the staff can approve solar panels on non-visible roofs without it coming to a public hearing, which of course we're very supportive of. And even they're looking at changing the rules to allow solar panels, even visible roofs and primary roofs, and we are in support of some of that, because this is something that we need to do. We've just asked them to consider roofing materials that may be historically important, terracotta tiles or sculpture. If there is something on that roof, that there is an additional layer of review to make sure that it's not damaging those materials. But we are fully supportive of those, and LPC is streamlining their guidelines so that it is easier for people to put solar panels on designated roofs without having to go through a large process.
And just for reference, I live in a building that's in a historic district, and several years ago, we installed solar panels on our roof. I mean, and they're, flat, you cannot see them from the street, but still in a historic district. Interestingly enough, when we get to the next agenda item, which is from the Department of City Planning, one of the things included in the sort of the carbon neutrality zoning text amendment does address solar panels on the roof. So we'll have further discussion of that when we get to it.
And maybe Audrey could address that. We sent a letter to city planning just asking that they coordinate with the LPC to make sure LPC is aware and supportive of those goals and processes.
So what about buildings that try to get designation, but we don't know that for sure. I have no way of knowing that, but I'm just thinking if a building get a designation and then they have to go through the local law 97, maybe will they be exempt from things like heat pumps on the windows, or getting pipings that will be exterior piping that related to heat pump that will sit on the ground or something like that?
I would say they wouldn't go for designation, because a lot of times that's just going to add an additional layer where, in addition to following local law, landmarks would have to review where those go and what they look like. So it might add an additional layer.
My point was just because local law 97 is on the expensive side for many buildings, that if they get designations, then get exemption for certain things that they don't have to spend the money for.
But getting designated, you don't get a list of exemptions. Any work that is done that is visible from the street needs to be architecturally appropriate. So even if the building was designated, 40 years ago, and you're doing something, you can change the windows, yes, but it can be architecturally appropriate. Can you tack things on the facade, whether it's for local law 97 or just because you want to do it, for some other reason? LPC may see that's not, appropriate. But also, as we know, designation, if you get it, can still take you 6 to 10 years. So it's not a quick way to get an exemption.
Right.
Yeah. I see two hands. I think the first one was from Tracy, and I believe Tracy is also a new board member. So welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. Give me
Yes, we can.
Word. Perfect. My question is that just speaking to the maybe lack of transparency by the LPC committee, when buildings are rejected, I know that people can listen to the discussion and have a question and answer period with LPC, but is there no final summary report, like this is the reason, or these are the considerations we put to the forefront to say no? And then secondarily, my follow-up question would be, can buildings reapply with additional information? Just to give an example, speaking of the building owned by the abolitionists, could they just resubmit with, more scholarly information, so forth and so on? Thank you.
To your first question, they do, they send a letter back. It's fairly brief. I think Wayne quoted it at the beginning of this meeting in terms of their rejection of 101 Cooper, saying, there are other better examples by this architect elsewhere. And, this does not feature all the elements we're looking for in this style. It's not definitive, but, they did list a few reasons there. And then in terms of resubmitting if something is rejected, we really have rarely, if ever, seen the Landmarks Commission willing to reconsider a building. But also when Wayne had mentioned the Dizzy Gillespie residence, which is a very simple building, the Elmhurst Historical Society in Queens submitted that several years ago and it was rejected. And so they were very pleased that the LPC, I think, realized its cultural significance and so was willing to re-examine it because of that. And I think, you know, they are getting that kind of pressure to show that they are taking their equity framework and more cultural designations seriously. But in general, I rarely ever have seen them reconsider a building that was rejected unless it had enormous political pressure or radical new kind of information comes to light.
Jim Berlin.
Thank you. I just want to second something basically Wayne was saying. You know, if a building has been landmarked because of its facade and you know, specifically the aesthetics or the interesting whatever of the facade, you wouldn't want to have cooling pipes crisscrossing in front of it. So and it's also possible, one would presume that pipes could also possibly at more expense be installed behind the facade in the building, whatever. So I think, you know, granting, and I'm sure, you know, the Preservation Commission understands this and they're not going to grant, you know, any kind of exemption for something that will obscure or otherwise disfigure the facade. So there has to be some reasonableness to the process.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Actually, Jim and Tracy, you can take your hands down. Are there other questions or comments?
Yes, my hand was up because I had a secondary
Okay.
question. I'm sorry. I've only attended a couple of LPC meetings. Is it always all architects and engineers? Are there no sort of, you know, anthropologists and social scholars on the committee?
The city charter requires there be at least one architect, one realtor, strangely. There's several professions that are required as part of the charter, but the rest of them would be considered lay members. So right now, I think on the commission, there's a few new people on there, but I want to say there are 4 or 5 architects, one realtor from Staten Island just joined, and the others there are sometimes lawyers on the commission. The others are considered lay members and have some interest or involvement in historic preservation. You know, but it is a political point. All commissioners on the Landmarks Commission are appointed by the mayor.
No shade to architects.
No. And we have found that helpful because, again, in many ways, they are a design review agency. And so understanding drawings, and that has been really helpful. But right, we have suggested that there need to be more historians and other types of people on the commission to kind of look at this more holistically.
Anthony.
Thanks, Wayne. I just wanted to take a step back about maybe what our role can be in terms of supporting RFEs. So you had mentioned, you know, one great tool available through Community Board is that we're able to engage residents, we're able to engage the folks that actually live in the buildings that may be seeking a designation. So when I've reviewed resolutions that we've put together in the past, oftentimes our whereas section, which sort of is like the evidence or support of our resolution, often relies more on the information that's presented to us, maybe the reason why the building is seeking a designation, or a lot of the detail that probably is already in the RFE. Would you say that it may be better to use more of that space to talk about what the community's support and is in terms of supporting the designation? Would you say that there should be more sort of discussion around there about what the residents feelings of the designation are?
Well, I think that's the formal kind of support to LPC. It could reference that there is strong community support, but I don't know, without getting into specifics, if there was a petition or there was something, we've received, the community board is aware that there have been over 800 postcards signed in favor of of the apartment house district, for example, if that was what you all were supporting, or we know there's a change.org petition online that has 1,000 signatures. I do think you could reference that, but I think it's also something where the committee or the board could say to people who are asking for those letters of support, we would like to see additional support from building residents or neighbors or community members in support of this. I think so that's something we would like to support more on, is getting these petitions and getting the information out there so that when it comes to LPC and LPC is like, we're interested, and then they get a lot of pushback from someone that they just stop the process.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, because, at the hearing for 935, and even when we were considering, 101 Cooper, I would have expected more public support, either, in the case of 101 Cooper, folks showing up at the general meeting to encourage the board to adopt the resolution that was passed by land use, or at, the LPC hearing to, encourage LPC to designate, 935. There was a fair amount of support for, the Dizzy Gillespie building. That's probably because it had been previously rejected. But I've always said, not necessarily just for, LPC stuff, but the resolutions that at least land use pass, we need to speak the language of the agency to whom it's being submitted. And so we need to understand, what BSA, what they're looking for, what Landmarks is looking for. And in some cases, like, folks may be looking at designation because they don't trust the landlord or they don't want something. But these are things that, for example, LPC is not going to consider. It's not in their purview. But, if there is interest on the part of the community in preservation, and there's been interest on the part of the board and elected officials, I mean, these are some of the things that, we endeavor to say in the whereas, but we definitely positively should encourage folks to send letters of support, so that it's not just the community board saying that residents are interested, but there are, actual letters, sent to the, the chair of LPC, and they can submit it, online, so that there's documentation that there's support, for this, whatever this is. Other questions, comments? Daniel?
I find this to be all like very, very interesting, and it's like something that I'm not too familiar about, and I'm just like reading a couple of things while being on the meeting. I also like wonder, how loud does like the community's voices have to be to actually get just like even designated, or like or have someone consider us or highly consider us, because it just seems like it's either like a beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or the city just wants this place to be that because it gives them a bigger portfolio or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's the LPC, and as they always say in their letters, we will consider your requests based on our priorities, our changing priorities, because, I would say in every year they probably get 10 to 15 requests for new historic districts, probably about 50 to 75 requests for evaluation for individual buildings, and only a very small portion of those are designated. And it takes a long time. One of the historic districts we just saw on Parkside Avenue, near Prospect Park in Brooklyn, they had submitted their request for evaluation in 2017, and it was designated at the end of 2022. So, and even that felt a little fast, that it took 5 years to get that. It was half of a block. It was half a block historic district. So I do, to your point, I think you do have to be loud, and I think that's where because this board is a formal, you know, it has a formal structure, can be a real strong advocate. And the elected officials, I mean, we have met with, and I don't know if the board encompasses more than one council member, but, you know, when we met with Councilmember De La Rosa over about 101 Cooper, you know, we said we would like you to advocate for other buildings in additional 101 Cooper. We look forward to providing lists to you, and you should be calling the landmarks chair and saying, these are the buildings I want designated. And she said she was willing to have that conversation. So that's where we want, you know, her and other the assembly people and the state senators and Congress people to be advocating strongly on your behalf as well.
Yeah, Community Board 12, I mean, we have two council reps. Carmen De La Rosa has most of the district. Sean Abreu as part of it. The 857 actually, you know, falls into Sean's area. And we have engaged with, I mean, you know, Carmen has spoken, I mean, Carmen has emailed us, you know, supporting 101 Cooper. So, you know, as I said, it is a political process. And, you know, when Robert Jackson was our council rep, and we'd ask Robert if he supported something, he'd say, no. What does the community board support? I will support your position. And that's critically important, because at the end of the day, community boards have an advisory role, whereas the council, you know, has the ability to, you know, put a little muscle, you know, behind it. So, I mean, if we pass a resolution asking for something and, you know, that's it, it's a little different than if, you know, the council rep is picking up the phone to LPC and say, what are you doing about this? I see three hands. I see Aisha's hand, and you should be able to speak. And until I think last month, Aisha was a member of this committee, for your reference, Frampton.
I was, and I plan to continue attending meetings. This definitely falls in my interest bucket, especially since I'm pursuing my appraisal license. And also because I'm a member of the community for 43 years. My question is in relation to, I heard it said that once a building has been considered and denied, that usually it doesn't come up for reconsideration. And in this age, we're in a time where a lot of things are being revisited, specifically because of the injustice of bigotry, bias, and discrimination, right? And I would guess that LPC is not exempt from some of those practices, and therefore that cultural relevance has been overlooked in communities specifically like ours. And I wonder if there's been any conversation about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And I you know, I think the LPC says that they are doing this through their equity plan. And I don't want to speak for them, but I do think in this case, you're right. There are opportunities for things that may have been turned down a long time ago, you know, for specific reasons to be revisited. And in the case, I think Vivian was talking about 857 Riverside. I mean, I do think we need to keep pushing there, because that is so important. And I don't believe that the LPC's reasoning is valid. And happy to strategize with you all. I mean, I would love to get this, get 857 in some way in front of the mayor, because again, the LPC is going to do what the mayor tells them to do in certain ways. And he took a very strong interest in the designation of the former colored school number 4 in Chelsea, which was just designated, and announced that $6 million from the city was going to restore that building. So I do think there are other things we can do there to get some of these places reconsidered.
Thank you.
Vivian?
Oh, I wasn't even muted. Imagine that. We actually had very strong turnout in terms of politicians, you know, up or, you know, through Jumaane Williams. The only person we didn't have was Mayor de Blasio. And ironically, when in 2009, when the Audubon Park Historic District was approved, I was the only person that showed up from the neighborhood to the hearing. That said, there were tons of letters. So obviously things can be approved, or the committee can respond even without a bunch of human beings sitting there. And it would be great, Frampton, to work with you about coming back to 857, because it's just, it was very painful, and Mayor de Blasio's, because his wife was in favor, Charlene, of a particular building that it was equally ugly, but in Brooklyn that had less evidence and was landmarked. It was also, that was painful. But what I was going to say also is that I don't know that they ever come north to see this neighborhood, and I don't know how much you could make the commission get on a little jitney and travel around. We had the sense that they hadn't a clue where this neighborhood is, or what that house, the significance where it is, all of this. That's my feeling about Upper Manhattan.
Yeah, I mean, well, that back to your point of like that the staff is doing that work, the commissioners aren't necessarily, and the commissioners may not be aware that 857 was rejected. So there's also something where we could talk with internally about maybe a possible quiet campaign to talk with the commissioners separately about 857 and its significance, especially since there's a few new commissioners who joined this year. And I believe that the mayor will probably replace most, if not all, the commissioners coming up, because they're all serving on expired terms.
Jim Berlin.
Thank you. I want to reflect on something that I may have heard Wayne say. And on one level, I agree, on another level, I don't. He indicated that when we speak to agencies, we should speak in their language. And I agree that that sort of makes sense. But you have to turn it around, because we're the community board. We represent the community. And certainly in the case of some agencies where, and I don't want to be less than charming, but sometimes when aesthetics is involved, or other such fine points are involved, they don't listen to what the community is saying, precisely because the community is not using their jargon correctly. And I'm not saying there's no use for jargon, but the point is, the responsibility, I agree, is ours, and maybe advocating for the community, that's an important thing we have to do, speak their language. But in the big picture, they have to be listening to our language and the community's language. That's another important part.
Yeah, I think the phrase that I use, and I've used it on several occasions, is we need to understand the language they speak. And it's, to some extent, the role of the committee and the community board to translate or communicate to those agencies the community's concern, and phrase it or package it in such a way that they understand why it is relevant to them given their areas of jurisdiction. I mean, last year we were discussing the sidewalk bridging at the subway station at 168th and Broadway, and there was a resolution that was structured to discuss a variety of things with the MTA. And it's like, well, wait a minute, the MTA has nothing to do with that sidewalk bridging. That sidewalk bridging is up because the building, which is actually owned by the city of New York, has facade issues. And so to some extent, it's, you want to speak to the city of New York, want to speak to the building department. It's just kind of ensuring that we've got the right focus, and in structuring the resolution, we're letting them know our concerns, but also letting them know why it's their area of jurisdiction and why they need to respond. But I mean, we do need to make sure that the concerns of the community, the concerns of the community board are, shared with whomever it is we're sending that resolution to. Aisha, I think that's an old hand that you have up.
It sure is. I'll lower it.
No problem.
All right.
Are there other questions or comments for Frampton? If not, we can certainly work on, because some of this has been around for a while, a list of sites, that we would like help in, sort of strategizing. Certainly, there's been a lot of work done to document potential apartment houses in Inwood and parts of, Washington Heights. And, we could say, what makes a good cluster? I mean, 101 Cooper, I think, is one of 3 Art Deco buildings, like within, a few blocks of each other. And then there are other, buildings that are not Art Deco, which is why I keep saying maybe it shouldn't be an Art Deco apartment house district, just an apartment house district. So you capture the Art Deco and the Tudor Revival. There are a couple of, Renaissance Revival tenement buildings that happen to, I think, be the first 2 apartment buildings, put up in, Inwood. So you might be able to find hundreds of buildings that look like them all over the city. But historically, those are the first 2 that went up in that area. So, so we can certainly work at pulling that together. And you would, certainly appreciate, HDC's guidance in strategizing how to move these efforts forward.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, we'd love to work with you on that. We could help put together possibly a little survey if you want to do any, ask committee members or board members if there are sites that they're interested in considering, and then happy to follow up with Vivian about making another push on 857.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us. And I think I'll see you in about a week.
Yes. Well, no. Well, I don't know. I might see you this weekend. I'm moderating a panel at the conference on Saturday. So
okay. Yes. And just that's a good point. So last month when Ewan was here, she mentioned the preservation conference that's on the 10th. I share with everyone. So it's at City College School of Architecture. I shared the link. So those of you who are interested, please sign up and register. I will be there. At the last time I attended, it was a great, event. So
can you put the link in the chat for those that that might not have gotten it?
I will. I don't have it.
I have it in my email, Wayne, so I can put it in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, okay, I don't have it. If you have it readily available, you can drop it in. Otherwise, Tracy, I'll just have the, the board office circulated to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, as I mentioned, is consideration of the Department of City Planning's City of Yes for carbon neutrality, which is a zoning text amendment. Committee members may recall that we had an initial discussion of sort of the framework of this zoning text amendment, several months ago. And I guess at that time, the language was, not yet formalized. It is now, and it's out for review, and Department of City Planning or the City Planning Commission will consider the text amendment on June 15th. So for us, that means they're going to consider it before our executive committee meeting, which is on June 20th, and before the general meeting, which is the 27th. So anything that we pass tonight will have to be approved by Catherine as chair of the board in order to get it submitted to city planning by the 15th. And, for any new committee members and new board members, that's the protocol. Typically, the procedure is a committee passes a resolution, but that is not the official position of the board until it goes to the full board at the general meeting and the board votes on that. If the board votes on it and approves it, then that is the position of, the board. In instances where there's a time issue, The executive committee, which typically meets a week or so before the general meeting, has the authority to adopt it on behalf of the board, and then at the general meeting, it is ratified. If, as in this case, the action is happening before even the exec committee, then the chair can do it, but once again, it will need to be ratified. I see Jim Berlin's hand, and Jim's probably going to give us some additional information on the procedure.
No, I'm actually going to thank you, Wayne, for doing an excellent job of explaining it. And the rationale, of course, by the executive committee and the chair have this additional discretion because there may be, as is in this case, time constraints. However, everything that's done by them has to be ratified, as Wayne explained, and that's also true of anything that happens during the committee of the whole during the summer. And it does put constraints on both the chair and the executive committee, because if they say that, they approve something on behalf of the board, and then the board said, well, that's really not what we think, it will be a very embarrassing situation for the board and for them, since they will have to send out official paperwork rescinding all this stuff. So it's I think a very helpful safeguard in our bylaws.
Anthony?
Sorry, I'm just asking a question for clarification. So can you just help me understand why it is that we can't approve it at the general meeting? Because I'm looking at the zoning application portal, and it says that the community board review goes until July 3rd.
Well, I can get clarification from our two city planning reps when they present. In the email that was sent to Catherine and the executive director, it indicates that city planning's hearing is on June 15th. So if it's not June 15th, then yes, it can go to the general meeting. So, but once again, Audrey, Jose, the floor is yours. And the very first thing you can do is let us know when city planning is actually going to consider this.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Jose Trucios, Upper Manhattan team leader for team leader for Upper Manhattan. I have a headache with all this smoke.
Welcome to the club.
I'm joined by Audrey here, who is the board of planner for community board 12 and 9. Just a quick point of clarification on the referral processing here. So this is application, the zoning text amendment is now subject to ULURP. So essentially a public hearing is not required. There's a lot of things that are not applicable for this application, although are highly recommended. One thing to say, so one point of clarification first, because there are two kind of updates on this. But the first one is the vote is scheduled for also like the public review period ends on July 3rd, as Anthony had pointed out within our sub portal. Now the commission is thinking of tentatively holding sometime on September for this vote, given that some boards have reached out saying that they won't have enough time to submit their materials by July because of the scheduler. So there is that period of like, we're gonna continue to accept resolutions and comments from community boards until September. What we have been encouraging boards is to, if you have the time to bring this up to your June and July committees, get it up now. We are also, making ourselves available to answer any questions in the meantime. So we're currently in the process of compiling questions for community board 9, 10, and 11, who are the boards that we already presented to distribute those back to the committee to help them with their votes. But those a couple of things that I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, so if I understood what you said, or let me rephrase it. City planning is still going to hold a meeting on June 15th, but will continue to accept. So there's no meeting on the 15th.
Yes, there's no meeting on the 15th, on June 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, the public review ends on July 3rd.
And you'll continue to accept comments until September.
I can't remember because it hasn't been completely, solidified, but it's either the first week or the first, review session of September that I don't have at hand right now. But once we get that information, we'll follow up with you. Again, our recommendation is to try to have the vote as early as possible, or at least the hearings, right? So you have your recommendations.
Yeah, well, for us, September doesn't matter because that means we can discuss it here and we can take it to the June general meeting and we'll be fine then.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I was looking at the email even earlier today when I resent it to the office and to Catherine. I was reminding them that they would need to act quickly, but now we have the normal process to follow. So that can be reflected in the minutes. Okay, so the floor is yours and you should have the ability to share your screen, or one or both of you should.
Thanks, Wayne. And hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Walks. I'm a borough planner for community boards 9 and 12. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality text amendment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'm so sorry, I might have to take some breaks for water and coughing because this smoke is getting to me. So yeah, so let's begin. Tonight we're going to talk about the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality text amendment, which is an opportunity to update our zoning regulations to help meet our city's climate goals. Here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to review some background on the City of Yes, outline some climate initiatives and outreach that preceded the carbon neutrality text amendment, examine the text amendment's 4 goals and 17 proposals. And within that, we hope that these specifics address some of the concerns the board raised in its October 2022 meeting when, as Wayne was saying, DCP first presented the ideas. And finally, we're going to share the timeline and next steps for the text amendment review and approval. This is a bit a lengthy presentation, so I'm sure that there will be questions. In order for Jose and I to best answer those questions, if you could drop any questions or concerns in the chat, that would be very helpful. But if you have an urgent question or you're unable to access the chat, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and we will make sure that you are heard.
Yeah, just for us, I don't think the committee and board members, actually, I don't know, can committee and board members, can you enter things in chat or Q&A?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Never mind, I take that back. Sometimes the way it's set up, we can't, but the public can, but if we're able to access it, then good.
Great, and if there are any issues, just feel free to jump in. All right, so the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality is the first of 3 projects that the Department of City Planning is developing as part of Mayor Adams's broader City of Yes initiatives, which is charging agencies to take a hard look at outdated regulations, holding New Yorkers back from investing in their homes, businesses, and our city overall. In addition to the carbon neutrality text amendment, there are 2 other initiatives, economic opportunity and housing opportunity, which will begin more public engagement later this summer. They're distinct and independent proposals. So in order to avoid inundating community members during the public review process, DCP is staggering reviews for each one this year, 2024. So This text amendment aims to deliver zoning relief to property owners who want to save on energy costs and reduce emissions through retrofits, but who are currently stymied by zoning rules and regulations. And finally, the City of Yes for carbon neutrality isn't the last word on sustainability. There will be sustainability components in the forthcoming economic opportunity and housing opportunity text amendments. First, I'd like to frame our conversation. Why are we talking about carbon? We're talking about carbon because we're facing a climate emergency, and it is largely fueled by global CO2 emissions. Carbon dioxide makes up a vast majority of the United States greenhouse gas emissions. And here in New York, the goal is to reduce the city's emissions 80% by the year 2050. In this presentation, I'm going to be using the word decarbonization a lot. And simply put, decarbonization is the process of reducing greenhouse gas emissions produced by the combustion of fossil fuel. In New York, the key driver of our city's carbon emissions is by far our building sector. And there's a big relationship between our buildings and the zoning laws that govern them. This slide depicts some of the initiatives that led up to the carbon neutrality text amendment from Zone Green in 2012 through today. For time's sake, I'm going to move quickly through the next two slides so we can focus on the text amendment itself. This slide illustrates our community outreach around the current proposals. And along the way, we've asked experts, nonprofit leaders, and advocates the following questions. What can the city do to help achieve our collective climate goals? How has zoning helped or hindered the advancement of these goals? And through our engagement over the last year, we've identified 17 ways in which zoning can tackle the climate crisis. To that end, DCP has divided these 17 proposals into 4 overarching goals. Tonight, we'll review the text amendments, goals, and proposals. Goal 1 is to decarbonize our energy grid. Goal 2 is to decarbonize our building stock. Goal 3 is to decarbonize our vehicles and transportation systems. And goal 4 is to decarbonize our waste streams. To decarbonize our energy grid, New York City zoning can help in 5 key areas listed on this slide. But first, I want to provide a bit of background. This slide shows initiatives underway at the state and city level. These are not part of our zoning proposal. They are the context in which our planning work is situated. By 2040, New York State is legally required to achieve a 100% renewable energy grid. And so to support this, we'll be developing large amounts of offshore wind and bringing in more clean hydroelectric power from upstate New York and from Canada. However, this transition will need an all hands on deck approach. This includes putting all of our rooftops to work, generating solar energy across the city. Here's where we stand on rooftop solar right now. In 2016, the city set a goal of producing around 1,000 megawatts of rooftop solar across the city by 2030. And to date, we are only generating around 300 to 400 megawatts. This means that we have only 7 years to more than double the amount of solar in New York City to meet our goal. To utilize energy from offshore wind and from rooftop solar, our energy grid needs to be more decentralized, with resources spread throughout the city instead of being limited to utility sites and outlying areas. And to support this decentralized grid, we'll need to store energy in large batteries. These batteries will act as the glue or the nodes of this future energy grid. Our first proposal is to take a fresh look at our rooftop zoning allowances. In R6 districts and above, For example, there's right now a 25% max coverage limit for solar panels with a 6-foot setback. This proposal updates those rules to ensure a roof can be 100% covered by solar as depicted in this rendering. Second, we need to maximize the solar potential of surface parking lots. Right now, zoning needs to be updated to allow solar canopies over the city's 8,000 plus acres of parking. The third proposal facilitates community solar, a scheme that allows, for example, your solar array to provide power to your neighbors. Today's zoning classifies community solar as a commercial use. However, there are large residential campuses, hospitals, schools, and colleges in residential districts where community solar would be a great fit. And our zoning needs to be updated to allow for that expansion of community solar on those sites. Fourth, we need to ensure that safe FDNY and DOB reviewed storage facilities for this energy are located where they're needed most. Energy storage via large rooftop batteries is currently not allowed in residential districts where customers need access to that energy. Consequently, zoning needs to be updated to add specific rules for energy storage in residential districts. Finally, onshore wind faces strict limits in today's zoning without a quote unquote relief valve for sites where greater heights might be appropriate. The zoning proposal will create a new tool that can be used by future applicants to submit onshore wind facilities for public review with the City Planning Commission. And to be clear, this proposal does not incur height restrictions on wind turbines. Our second goal is to decarbonize our building stock. We want to eliminate fossil fuels from our city's 1 million plus existing buildings because these buildings are by far our biggest sources of carbon dioxide emissions. To reduce emissions, we'll need to retrofit virtually every single building by replacing oil and gas powered furnaces and boilers with efficient electric systems. We'll also need to improve the efficiency of exterior walls, windows and roofs to keep the heat and the cool inside. And on this page, it's really important to note 2 crucial local laws adopted by the City Council in 2019 and 2021. For large buildings, as I'm sure most of you are familiar, Local Law 97 will begin to impose fines on building owners if they don't cut their carbon emissions. And second, Local Law 154 requires that all new buildings are electrified from the get-go. Fossil fuel-based equipment will be banned in new construction. And I do want to emphasize that these laws have already passed, and our zoning proposals will help owners comply with these laws. In this context, zoning can help support the decarbonization of buildings in 3 key ways. First is through the electrification retrofits and physical screens for rooftop mechanicals. Zoning can be changed to allow equipment like heat pumps, which can't be in basements or cellars, to be located above the zoning height limit on building rooftops, as depicted in this rendering on the slide. This will give owners, architects, and engineers greater flexibility to navigate the best path. Second is allowing envelope retrofits to meet code. Zoning needs to ensure that owners who'd like to upgrade insulation or reclad buildings don't run into zoning obstacles that stymie their project and their push towards energy efficiency. The third is promoting envelopes that perform better than code. The 2012, if you are familiar, the 2012 Zone Green Wall Thickness Deduction awards a small amount of additional floor area for quote unquote better than code buildings. And this can be updated to reflect the latest energy codes and best practices for the future. Then there's a big question, which is the money question. Undertaking this work will obviously not be free, but there are billions of dollars at the federal, state, and city level available to support it. Just to give one example, the New York City accelerators by the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice can connect owners with technical and financial support. The third goal, decarbonizing our vehicles, supports decarbonizing the 2 million private vehicles that New Yorkers own and drive. By 2035, just to give a little state context, Albany has indicated that all new vehicles sold in the state will need to be zero emission. And finally, we also recognize that the future of transportation isn't all about vehicles, especially in Manhattan. The more trips that can be taken by bicycle or scooter or on foot or by e-bike or by public transportation, the better it will be for the health of our environment in our city. Within this context, zoning can support this vehicle and transit decarbonization with 5 key changes. Excuse me. First, we can allow commercial charging facilities in all commercial and manufacturing districts. And right now, those charging facilities are prohibited in about half of the city's commercial districts. Second, we can allow building owners to designate a portion of their existing parking spaces as public EV charging stations. These are the same rules that currently apply today for car sharing vehicles in existing parking garages or lots. Third, we can allow for more flexible uses of public parking lots, parking garages, and commercial accessory parking facilities by allowing car rental, car sharing, commercial vehicle storage, and public EV charging within those facilities as well. Fourth, we can expand special rules that allow for indoor, quote unquote, automated parking facilities to be available to everyone citywide. Right now, these rules only apply in Manhattan. And fifth, we can update our parking rules to boost public bicycle parking and allow parking facilities in commercial districts. Our fourth and final goal is to decarbonize our waste streams to reduce our city's stormwater and solid waste. This goal will help reduce the carbon emissions associated with both of these critical waste streams. First, we can reduce stormwater runoff by promoting greater permeability on site. This means less water flowing into energy-intensive wastewater treatment plants. Second, up to 45% of our waste stream is organic material that doesn't need to go to the landfill and can be reused within the city. Diverting organic material from landfill reduces the energy associated with hauling and processing garbage. And third, we can reduce the carbon emissions associated with our food by promoting more local food production on our city's rooftops. Within this context, zoning can help contribute to this better environment in 4 key ways. First, we aim to clarify zoning's paving rules to ensure that permeable paving, which allows water to infiltrate the soil instead of running off into the storm drain, is always allowed. Permeable paving is always allowed. And second, we can update our zoning street tree requirements to allow for new high-performance tree bed types, such as connected tree beds and rain gardens. And third, our zoning resolution right now, surprisingly, doesn't mention the words compost or recycling. So it's time to add specific rules clarifying where these uses are allowed to help these sectors grow. And finally, rooftop greenhouses are allowed on top of non-residential buildings, but to build one, the current rules require that you obtain a certification from the chair of the City Planning Commission. By streamlining this requirement, we'll be able to allow DOB to review applications for building permits for these greenhouses, a move that will cut costs and simplify the process for people who want to grow food on their rooftops. That concludes our overview of the 17 specific zoning proposals. We've identified that support the decarbonization of New York to keep our city green, healthy, and equitable for years to come. Now I'm quickly going to review the timeline and next steps, and then open the floor to questions. So as a citywide zoning text amendment, the reviews process will continue for the next several months. Right now, all 59 community boards across the city are reviewing the proposal with their borough boards and borough presidents. Per our conversation before the start of this presentation, we're going to clarify some of those timelines for the City Planning Commission hearing and vote. So we will, Jose and I will get back to you with those answers. That concludes our presentation on the City of Yes for carbon neutrality text amendment. And I will turn the mic over, or the chat over, to the committee for questions and comments.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And following your instructions, I put a number of questions in chat. I see 2 hands. I see Vivian, and then I see Daniel, and I see a real hand from OC. So Vivian, you're first.
I wonder to what extent I know it's a proposal, but to what extent money has, if this were to happen, there's money committed, that's part of it. I mean, I know that there is, compost collection was reduced and the mayor said, oh, there's only 100,000 people who use it, which wasn't true. Then they put these cans in Upper Manhattan that require you to understand how to use an app, which is discriminatory. And there are other parts of this as well that I wondered, the street trees question, and if there's enough money for enough street trees, is there a sense that money will be committed to make this possible?
Jose?
Sorry, I realized I was muted. Well, one of the things that we need to clarify here is that the zoning text amendment we're proposing in here is not a program itself. What we're doing is removing the restrictions that are detrimental to or are precluding business, not business, but buildings for complying with zoning in terms of like adding any type of retrofitting or green infrastructure. In terms of funding, personally, the state has committed a large amount of money to the whole green infrastructure programs and processes for now between now and 2050. That's something that we can get a little more specific with in our responses we can send to you. But just wanted to make that clarification between what the text amendment and like the actual application, not so much implications but the application of retrofitting, green waste management, things like that will fall perhaps on the not separate agencies, but are not part of our proposal.
If I could just kind of piggyback on that, in the project description that was on City Planning's website for this, which I shared with the committee, when it comes to, I guess, composting and recycling, the rationale seems to be that not so much from the perspective of the city undertaking something, but if private industry wanted to set up something, the way the current language is written, composting or recycling really isn't recognized. Zoning recognizes a dump and it recognizes trash, but if you want to set up a business that is composting, it doesn't exist. It's like the language is out of date. So you're basically, it's like updating the dictionary so that the term actually now exists and there are clear rules in terms of what you can do and what you can't do and where you can do it.
That is correct. That's a perfect way to put it in there, and that is not just applicable to the waste, but essentially all the proposal, right? This is one of the text amendments that has been, particularly by me, very easy to read because it's a lot of addition rather than removing or changing or modifications. It's a lot of the language that we haven't considered in the last, 30 plus years since 1961 when the resolution was last updated or created on this one. So
Okay, and I think the hands are on my screen in the order they were put up. So I think the next one is Daniel.
One of my questions is, are there any kinds of renewable energy that can be used through water? Like, I don't know, like dam technologies. Is that something that the city considered aside from solar panels and just like wind, like any water turbines or anything like that?
yeah, I think we have heard that question before. If we had done enough research or enough exploration to different alternatives that were the ones that we're proposing. I think again in terms of department city planning, we do have some engineers and we do have some people with multiple backgrounds, but we are particularly involved and invested of is allowing others, as the Office of Climate and Sustainability was, Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Who are in charge or are looking at these alternatives to be, able to make those changes. So, let it be seen if we get a different, guidance in the future, this could be potentially also be amended to include those type of different type of energy in the area. But this is what we're limited with as of now. I think, that's something that throughout the presentations that we had done in the community boards, I have learned a lot in terms of like what community members are particularly interested on or done research in the past. Some of them have sent us, some articles and reports, and then we're collecting those and also sharing with the people who have worked on this text amendment.
Yeah, I would think with like living in a city of like near water, that could, I don't know if it helps just like a little bit,
OC.
Okay. So in 2017, the Community Board 12 passed a resolution, the right to sunlight. And I'm not sure if you are familiar with that resolution. The point of it is to be able to produce solar power off our roofs. And with that, we are saying that because most of Inwood and I think some of Washington Heights, but Jim Berlin will correct me because he did the calculation, is more or less the same building heights, somewhere around 5 to 7 story buildings. And in order to produce solar, we should preserve the height in our district. And so it's almost like looking at that as like our right to sunlight is almost like if you want to look at it like air rights, if you will. Okay, so we have some way to produce electricity to either to contribute to the grid or to our own consumption if a building can be get off. I mean, like if they can get off the grid, I'm not really sure, but it's something to look into. And I didn't hear anything about that. But so heights of building is really important. I didn't hear you guys talking about that because if you have a 5-story building and next door to it is a new development for 30, and they are to the south of the existing building, you're actually taking away the ability of the existing building from producing their own electricity. So it's something that should be in the text amendment, and I'm sure you can find a resolution that we passed back in 2017. and so the other reason why DCP should think about that specifically is in relation to FEMA with the additional storms that we're getting, that, you know, we're getting like 100-year storm every, 5-10 years now. So think about how many people may not need FEMA intervention if their, I don't know, refrigerator can continue to work and they can stay at home. And so this is the thing, some of the thinking behind that. So it's something to incorporate into the text amendment. Other thing that I didn't hear is phasing out number 4 oil that currently is scheduled to be phased out in 20.
That's not zoning, OC. That's not zoning.
It's not zoning, you're right. Okay. But you talk about permeable surfaces. Are we going to have permeable sidewalks? Is that going to be part of the requirements going forward?
Too many questions.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm familiar with local law 97, so I had a few questions, and I don't know if the building grades isn't part of it or not, but the problem with that biodiesel right now doesn't get higher grade, and the problem with that is that the biodiesel in New York City comes from cooking oil.
Right.
So it doesn't, right. So,
and that's not zoning.
okay. All right, I think I'm gonna stop here.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, they're really great questions. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the resolution you're talking about, but it's not surprising to me. Every time we talk about it, it seems like you guys are being one step ahead on anticipating things that are coming along. I mean, I came to you doing the open restaurants or so about a year ago, and we also talked about something similar. For heights, you know, this is a question that we get constantly. The proposal is not amending heights. What it's doing is actually, you know, allowing the obstructions that are counted into, you know, the height limit to be counted for within the bulkhead. So say in the building is able to get to, you know, or a maximum height of 150, that is going to remain the same. What is going to happen is that if you do 100% coverage, I believe you get up to 35% of the, sorry, I had it before in my head and I forgot, but just to be clear, so I don't want to give you, you know, wrong information. We can follow up with these questions in writing after we vet them by our experts. But I know, just to be clear, that there is no modifications on heights of the buildings. That has been very, you know.
So you're promoting technology that not necessarily be able to be implemented if you're not talking about heights.
Well, no, I mean, this is a city-wide initiative. So depending upon specific sites and the orientation, the building height may or may not cast, you know, a shadow and reduce the ability. And on some sites, clearly, you know, that'll be the case. But in the existing urban fabric, there are some sites where part or all of the roof, you know, would not have sufficient, you know, sunlight to generate it. But once again, this is a citywide initiative, not something that is, you know, limited just to Washington Heights Inwood. But that said, you know, it's important to consider how, if you're, you know, encouraging rooftop solar, how that works.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, we have heard that question before. You know, you are incentivizing something without making it a mandate, and you know, I think that is something that, you know, zoning isn't the particular tool to do for that, for a mandate, for a, you know, a law. That's why we have local law 97 and other things. And what this is doing is allowing buildings to comply with this,
Yeah.
with those requirements, because at the moment you're not able to do that.
And just as an example, although the next person in line is Steve, Vivian pointed out that she lives across the street from me. Her building is several stories taller than mine, but it did not prevent my building from installing solar panels on the roof. Steve.
First of all, I want to say to Audrey and to Jose that I think it is great that that city planning is planning to update the zoning resolution to take into account the carbon issue and climate change. This is a huge advance and should be recognized as such. Now, there's a heck of a lot of material here to absorb, and I don't know that I really had the opportunity to do so.
You mean you didn't read all the things I emailed to you, Steve? For shame.
No, no, I'm afraid I have to admit that I did not do so. But I would like to. I hope you can furnish the PowerPoint to us so that we can.
I sent it to you.
Okay, well, in that case, I withdraw the request. But what is our timeline by which we have to comment on this? And I wasn't clear, Audrey, how much time the community board has.
Yeah, so we discussed that a little bit before the presentation. So that email that said city planning was having a meeting on June 15th, apparently that's not accurate. The public review period ends on July 3rd. So, and you know, anything we pass tonight does not have to get approved by the chair. We have time to take it to the general meeting at June 27th, I believe. But additionally, they said city planning will continue to accept comments until, I guess, the beginning of September. But, you know, we're not going to be working on this in July and August. So,
all right. So for all practical purposes, we need to do something tonight.
Yes.
All right. So let me just ask. At my, oh gosh, I'm sorry. At my committee recently, actually, it was a joint meeting with between both the Health and Environment Committee, which I chair, and the Housing and Human Services Committee. We had a detailed presentation from a woman who headed a task force at Community Board 4 that recommended a whole slew of recommendations related to zoning to some extent about providing space in buildings for to keep garbage, recyclables, composting within buildings. Is the zoning resolution addressing that in any way? Are we specifying that at least newly constructed buildings have to have sufficient space for in order to have a proper disposal and collection of all of these items?
There is an answer, and I think I can let Audrey respond to that. But I believe she put in the chat regarding particularly that component of how it's being included, that language specifically for what the compost allowances are. Audrey, I don't know if you want to add a little more on that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just clarifying that composting is an allowed accessory use. And so as far as the, the disposal and movement of the compost, I think that will be, that will be a multi, it will not just be the logistics. We're only able to address the zoning for that, but the logistics, I think, will be a multi-agency collaboration.
But if I could piggyback on Steve's question, because other aspects, I read through the description, and other aspects of it, says that, space that's allocated to XYZ would typically count in the FAR calculation. But, in order to, incentivize, the carbon neutrality initiative, the space would not be, considered as part of the FAR if you're doing a, sort of an overcladding of the building, and normally you could only protrude 8 inches or whatever, there's, you can do a greater amount where it doesn't count. So if we are saying not that the building should have the sort of the code minimum amount of space that's required to hold garbage, you're encouraging a greater amount of space in the building so that it doesn't impact the street. Will that greater amount of space not count towards the FAR as an incentive? Because it's going to cost something to build that space. So, I mean, will there be some incentive to encourage folks to do that? Because building anything in New York City is expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think, and we'll, can you, sorry, I don't know if I'm muted. I'm good?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, sorry, I was just looking at my notes because this question has come out before. And it's something of the alignment also with the previous text amendment, which was zone green, that has that bonus applicability, but has been so difficult to comply with for building owners, as you mentioned. Installation and all different things are something that building owners would rather not do because it's so expensive and you're pretty much getting absolutely, or getting, not to say absolutely nothing, but you're getting very little out of it that people would rather do an extra floor or something else to accommodate for that floor area. This text amendment will, no ease up the requirements for some green, but making requirements a little, the deductions more open in order to get that bonus. So it's right now, I think the number was that we were only capturing 2-3% of the possible deductions or permittable obstructions that we can get in the building. This is open the window for that, and we foresee this being an incentive for floor area, particularly for building owners who are recalling or retrofitting and those things. Again, I just wanted to clarify, I'm speaking to you on a text amendment that is about 300 pages long. We had done some presentations. I know some of the answers, but we are I was going to ask Wayne because I don't have access to the chat to copy and paste, but if you can send me that transcript of those questions later so we can get back to you as soon as possible with those.
Well, actually, Jim is next. I was going to say that, we were asked to put it in chat, but I will just, read them out to you so that Anthony will have them, for the record, and then, you can respond.
Yeah, we'll copy and paste them somehow and, send it out to our team because we have been doing that with 9, 10, 11. Yeah. Our idea, our goal is to maybe share all of the questions as an Upper Manhattan effort to all of the boards. So you guys also familiar with what 11 or 10 or 9 had asked, given that we are kind of in the similar, geography in the area. So that's all we foresee as that being helpful. Hopefully we can send that to you before your general board meeting.
Right. And I think after the meeting is over, we get a transcript of everything that's in it. So when that is done, I can certainly forward everything that was put into, chat or Q&A to you. So Steve, are you finished?
Yes, I would just hope that we're going to take some action in support of this tonight.
Well, that's the intent. Jim Berlin.
Thank you. The resolution that OC spoke about is one we're very proud of. And every time we hear from the City Planning Commission that they never heard of it.
No, they've.
Well, allow me, wait. I have the floor now and I will talk. And if I'm incorrect, well, then so be it. Based upon what you're trying to do now, and I agree with my colleague Steve Simon that it is an absolutely wonderful thing that you're doing to create the zoning that will enable all this, green stuff to go on. But from our point of view, and that's why we're gonna I will ask that this resolution be sent to you guys again so you can examine it, because I think you'll be very pleased. As OC pointed out, there are sections of Washington Heights and Inwood where practically all of the buildings are either 5 stories or 6 stories, and none of them cast shadows on anything or one another. And this kind of construction is everywhere in New York. Brooklyn is full of it. all of Harlem is full of it. You know, the Lower East Side, all these places have this kind of construction where all the buildings are about the same height, don't have cast shadows, and are prime candidates for solar panels, photoelectric panels. Now, the key is that this is not just a few acres. This is square mile upon square mile. If we utilized it, we could probably not even need to import power. There's just so much area involved. So that's why we don't want shadows cast on any of these things. But it's even more significant because, and I don't know whether this is city planning and zoning, or maybe it's DOB, it's came from somewhere, but most of us are aware, and I'm sure you are too, that anytime a new roof is built or anytime you totally reconstruct a roof, you can't put it back the way you want. It either has to be white and reflective, it has to be a green roof, or it has to be solar voltaic panels. Now, the kind of construction we have around here with bearing walls and the wooden beams and all that, the standard 6-story stuff, they can probably not support a green roof because the beams are not strong enough, and you don't want to have to reinforce the whole thing with additional columns and stuff. However, photoelectric cells are not inherently heavy. So again, making all these roofs solar electric would allow all these buildings to not only contribute to the power that they're using, but the other piece of it, and it's sort of inherent in what you're talking about with these cooperatives. It's bigger than that. The whole idea of energy sustainability and keeping it running actually is to have a distributed network where the generation is everywhere and not just in power plants. And so if all of Inwood makes all the electricity for Inwood, it doesn't matter if all the power plants on the East Coast go dead, Inwood will still have all of its electricity. And this is true of these square miles and square miles of buildings throughout Brooklyn and Queens. And like I said, up here in Lower East Side, everywhere. So that's why I'm making such a fuss. And that's why we thought of this. And that's why we feel that this is like a perfect nexus in time. This is the time for our suggestion to really flower, because we, like I said, because of these square miles of area we have on roofs, can make, even with cloudy skies, there's just so much area that we can make huge amounts of electricity. But you cannot allow people to steal the electricity from a building by casting a shadow on it. And so the essential part, and apparently there's similar stuff that had been going on, we looked into in California, the attitude is, you buy a piece of property and everything about this property, well, normally you don't get the mineral rights, but forgetting about that.
Jim?
But normally, everything about this property is yours, including the sunlight that hits it. It's yours. You bought the building, it is where it is, and that's part of the essence of what we're talking about. So we hope that you look at this, because I think it's a very excellent suggestion that may be very helpful. Thank you, and I apologize for the little speech.
Yeah, so just as a point of clarification, I don't recall, and when we listen to the recording, it can be confirmed. I don't recall the city planning rep said they didn't know anything about that resolution, because we have actually discussed with them on a couple of occasions in the past. And I personally forwarded to them to review when we were sending a bunch of other resolutions when we were talking about zoning and other things that we have passed recently. So they do have it.
Well, again, now is the time to make a fuss.
We get it, but I was simply responding. I was simply
again.
back and forth. Let's be consistent. But I was simply responding to the fact I don't think they said they didn't have it. Relatively new, but they did get it.
And it again.
Yeah, so let me just, since it's 9:04, as you were going through the presentation, a couple things I commented on, and, the zoning text amendment will, allow for a number of things, and I'm just wondering who's going to be responsible for, reviewing this greater level of flexibility to ensure that whatever is implemented is done in a manner that is appropriate and sensitive to individual site conditions. Because as I said before, this is a citywide text amendment, but how it impacts a particular site is something that still needs to be considered. In the discussion of, sort of overcladding or recladding, I understand the benefit that someone gets from the amendment if they are overcladding. But if you're recladding and basically staying within the existing, building envelope, you're not protruding out any further. What is zoning actually giving to an existing building? It seems that there is no benefit there. Perhaps there is. There's a lot of discussion reading through the project description of, the revisions being applicable in commercial and in manufacturing districts. I'm wondering if they also would be applicable in a residential district that has a commercial overlay. And if so, is there a greater level of review that's given to ensure that whatever is done is compatible with the existing residential use? And then finally, when we were talking about growing food on roofs, which sounds great, but I'm thinking real estate in New York City, what mechanism will be put in place to ensure that the greenhouses are in fact used to grow food on the roof, as opposed to being an amenity space that's basically used to market the building and increase prices? So those were the questions that I put in chat.
Yeah, no, I think those are mainly, those are great questions. I was taking a look at those and trying to, get some answers. And I apologize because I don't have answers for all of them. But in terms of compliance and ensuring who's going to be, keeping track of this, the Department of Buildings will be taking the lead on this. They already have a sustainability page on their website that kind of outlines, even like for local law 97, what the exemptions are, the rollout process for public housing, for buildings under different categories. So Department of Buildings will be overseeing this process of because there was a talk about some fines if you don't comply by the actual year, and all the different things. So that information is there. The next question was about allowance for existing retrofitting that they're not adding more, but kind of staying in the same floor area. I want to say, and this is just my general knowledge, is that by allowing different permitted obstructions to be deducted from the floor area, you might still get that 5% or aim to the 5%, deduction of the floor area zone green. But I'm not 100% sure, because you bring a point of, in terms of like you are staying in the same, you're not growing, you're not getting anything out of it. But I will take note of that and get back to you. Unless, Audrey, do you have anything in here that I might have missed for that particular question?
No, I second what you said. But yeah, I can jump in quickly and say that to your question, Wayne, about the implementation regarding the effect on individual buildings for landmarks. For example, the LPC will have final say and review of any of these, like, for example, rooftop solar modification. So similar to, that would fall under the purview of LPC if it was an individual site or in a historic district.
Yeah,
so
I wasn't even thinking of that, but I mean, the idea of having, I forgot the square footage where you could basically have, sort of a batteries storing the solar energy. But if you can do that, in a residential or next to residential, who is making sure that that installation is appropriate for, its site? It's like having a mini substation in a residential area or wherever. So it goes, I wasn't even thinking of landmark per se. It's just that we're now allowing a number of things, and we're allowing them anywhere and everywhere. And The thought is,
Or sorry. Are you talking about, like, for example, the safety of the batteries or the appropriateness of them, or
I'm
both?
thinking of the appropriateness of the, installation. In some of the, in some of your written descriptions, some of the images, I mean, you show buildings and whatever you're doing, whether it's, a parking field that now is, covered with solar panels. Just the question is who is, because I can't think of every possible thing that could happen. And that's exactly the point, since this is a citywide initiative, who is looking at what is proposed to ensure that, it's in an existing context, that what is being done, even though it is now permitted anywhere and everywhere, that it's appropriate for that specific, what's being done and what's around it. And I accept the response that you may need to look into that to get back to us.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
But what about the question, going through this, there are a lot of things that will be allowed in any commercial or manufacturing district. But if it's basically a residential district that has a commercial overlay, which there are many, does that commercial overlay now bring in the greater zoning flexibility, or the fact that it's an underlying residential district, it does not?
The latter. So I actually just pasted that in the chat for the, they can opt for the rooftop greenhouse situation, but it's not the same as a qualifying rooftop green that is aimed by this proposal. It's the residential in green roof. I don't know, mix maybe, we'll be here in the next 10 years to modify that, because we realize that it's probably better for the environment.
Yeah. I see OC and Jim, but Aisha has not spoken on this topic yet. So can you speak now? Are you unmuted? Aisha? I'm clicking on this, it's not doing it. There. Aisha? You should be able to speak. What happened? Okay, she's gone. OC?
Yeah, question about the insulation with more like I'm assuming it's the cladding. DOF used to, maybe still is, giving exemption from the square footage of the building. So the point was just to have like 8 inch of insulation cladding, and of them only 1.5 inch to 2 inch is actual insulation. The rest of it could be whatever thing that look nice. Is this still the case, or there is any modification to that rule?
Okay, so I know that we have I will definitely get back to you in the applicability of that, because we had there is a section that talks about the qualifying exterior wall thickness, and I think that is where you get into the what is under the allowances in here. But in general, what I was told when we first got this question is the adding insulation is, in a building is a little less effective than overcladding. And that will be, like overcladding. I mean, insulation is still welcome, but I think the encouragement is for overcladding rather than adding insulation. But I'll get back to you to see if there have been any changes into what qualifiers for the wall thickness are.
Yeah.
I remember seeing this in the environmental assessment statement somehow quickly, but I don't have it in front of me right now.
Yeah, but just to piggyback, and the materials that were on your website that I circulated, I think it specifically says that the design needs to exceed the energy code by 10%. So it's not a matter of just having a little bit. I mean, if they want to get the FAR exemption, there's certain performance the wall has to meet. You have to have a certain minimum U factor, and it has to be better than energy code to get it. Jim?
Two things. One of them is there is, and in fact, it's not the the purview of the Department of City Planning to worry about the safety of all of this, potential equipment of solar cells, and particularly the batteries. At the moment, I think most of us are probably aware that these storage batteries occasionally burst into flames, and I believe, according to the current code, they cannot even be located in buildings at the moment. So, but that whole issue that's the job of the Department of Buildings, the safety part. And again, I think the distinction that was made between having zoning that enables something is one thing, and then whether it actually goes there, whether it's safe enough to go there, that's the part of another department. Now, the other thing, and I think we're sort of probably on the same, it's sort of detailed, but it's significant. If you're going to make the building bigger with some kind of cladding, the cladding should serve a purpose, like insulation. And if it's going to be 8 inches thick, but only 2 inches is going to be insulation, and the rest of it is going to make pretty gargoyles, that's not a reason to change the zoning. Because our consideration right now, and again, I so applaud you, as did Steve Simon, on taking these initiatives and making it possible for the city to make all the changes it will have to make so that we can be green enough in the future so we actually manage to survive. Okay, this is despite the grumbling from some idiots, this is an existential issue. And again, you ought to be applauded. But if you're going to allow another 3 inches of thickness on a building, that 3 inches had better be insulation.
Yeah.
I mean, you need some reinforcement or something, but and again, the reason I say this is because of abuses that have gone on in the past, maybe not with, planning, but with, so for example, these ridiculous mechanical floors that used to be allowed, 70 feet of nothing just to push a penthouse higher. Now that's no longer allowed, or it's been curbed, let's put it that way. But that should never have been allowed. And here the same thing. Right now, we have to keep our eye on the prize, and the prize is energy, generating it cleanly and keeping it in or keeping it out.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, and I would refer my fellow committee members and board members present, to the materials that are, on the website, and for the committee, the ones that I circulated, the project description, which, I mean, it's only like 11 or 12 pages, but I mean, it's, in this discussion of the wall thickness, there is a discussion of the need for that wall thickness to not meet, but rather to exceed the energy code in order for you to get the benefit. So it can't be fluff. It needs to be something that is serving a purpose that is going to make the building more energy efficient.
Ironically, fluff is a very good insulator.
Yeah, wrong use of the word. So Aisha, you're back. Is it working?
I'm back. Yeah, I think I was in a bad patch. I was near the bridge. So I was a part of a team as a result of me being a part of the Henry George School. I was invited to participate in a bid to develop land in East Harlem, where we met a group of gardeners. I believe they were connected to the city, where the plots that they were given in order to grow, whatever they wanted to grow, they received training for it, as well as there was like ongoing evaluation of the outcomes. And I just wanted to put that out there in regards to the question that you stated about how this could become something that's just for the purpose of aesthetics, so that a developer or a landlord can sell, their building instead of it becoming a community benefit. And so there are models out there that, would support it not happening that way. And I think also at Riverbank, there's a something that goes on like that, where people have plots of gardening area to do that.
But the zoning proposal is not talking about plots of land. It's talking about allowing greenhouses to be built on roofs for the specific purpose of growing food. And believe me, I have no problem with having a rooftop greenhouse that's an amenity. But if you're giving an incentive because you want to address the whole issue of using rooftops for, more sustainable uses and to, in this particular case, to grow food, I don't want the building, or the owner to get the benefit because they say they're going to grow food, but it turns out to be a disco
Right.
for the,
Right.
for the building. Once again, not
Right.
having any problem with dancing on the roof or having a couple cocktails, but it's a matter of honesty. And if you're getting a benefit to say you're doing X, let's make sure they do X.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's 9:20, and as Steve Simon asked and I answered, we do need to act on this tonight so that it can go to the full board this month so that we can get something to city planning for their July meeting. No need for us to string it along until September, since none of us are going to be working on this in July and August. So I would ask if there is a motion to support the Department of City Planning's City of Yes for carbon neutrality zoning text amendment.
I move.
I second that.
So just to explain, or for everyone, unlike at a general meeting, everyone in attendance, can vote. So the committee members can vote, other board members present can vote, and members of the public can vote. So I will first ask committee members present. We have a resolution that's been moved and seconded in support of the City of Yes for carbon neutrality zoning text amendment. Those committee members in favor either say aye or raise your hand digitally.
Aye.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, no. Hector, right now I'm going to be counting you as a board member. So put your hand down for the moment, and I'll get to board members separately. Okay, so are there any committee members opposed? Actually, I take your hands down now.
Hang on, Wayne, do you mind just saying out loud the numbers so I can
I
mark it?
I see 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stop. Oh, any? Okay, take your hands down. Any opposed? I see none. Any abstaining? So all committee members present, which would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us voted in favor. Now for board members, those in favor, you can raise your hand digitally or say aye. And Tracy, are you voting? Tracy, are you still there? I see you, but okay, so Hector, you can take your hand down. Are there any board members opposed? I see none. Are there any board members abstaining? I see none. So going to members of the public, those in favor?
Obviously, you're not required to vote,
Yeah, but
only if you want to.
yes, I see 2 hands. You can take them down. Thank you. Any members of the public opposed? Abstaining? And Tracy, getting back to you, I mean, you're a member of the board, but I didn't see any response from you, although I see you're still logged in. Okay, but as it stands, all votes are in favor, so that passes. I will, draft something for everyone to review, make sure that, my grammar is correct, and, we'll get it to the full board for the general meeting.
And Wayne, if it turns out that Kathy confirms that Hector is a member of this committee, just let me know so I can reflect that in the minutes, and I'll shift it up into the.
Sure. So, thank you so much, Audrey and Jose.
Thank you, guys. And sorry, I just
Thank
wanted to say
you.
I'm logging off because I actually had to run at 9:30. But I just wanted to say, we're looking forward to getting your questions, and we'll send that right away. We understand, it might be a time constraint. We didn't want to put you in a pressure of having to vote today and approve. We understand that this is something that we all concerned about. Giving, you can just look outside today and see how the weather is looking like, and how important this is. But we also wanted to give you the opportunity to send your comments, questions, and concerns. So, given that we're going to send these questions, so you have more things, definitely send it to us. And if there's something that comes out in your general board, we try to make ourselves available to be there and respond. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Audrey, you were going to say something?
Oh, yeah. If you could, I, for some reason, can't copy and paste things from the webinar chat into a document. So if you're able to, could you send me a transcript of the chat?
Yeah.
Just so we make sure we get all of the questions.
Yeah. When after the meeting ends, we get two documents. One is just the attendance, and the other one is kind of a transcript with the sort of all the Q&A. So when I get that, I will send it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Is there any old business? Is there any new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
I second the motion.
It is 9:26. Is there any objection to us going to have dinner? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Take care all. And stay inside, turn the air conditioner on. Take care.
Bye-bye.